Welcome to Relation Tales. Please like this video and subscribe Relation Tales. We're grateful for each and every one of you. Let us know where in the world you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let's begin. They say you can tell when something in your marriage starts to die, not by a fight, but by silence. That quiet space between two people who used to talk about everything. That's exactly how it began for me and Claire Hayes. We weren't a perfect couple, but we used to be a real one. Early mornings with coffee by the window, inside jokes over burnt pancakes, and long road trips where she'd sing off-key and I'd pretend to hate it. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Then her promotion came, the job she had always dreamed about. "It's a huge step, Michael," she said, her eyes shining. More responsibility, more visibility, and finally, recognition. I was proud of her. I really was. But somewhere between late-night meetings, client dinners, and business trips, the version of her I loved started fading. The woman who once couldn't wait to tell me about her day suddenly had nothing to say. I try not to sound jealous when she mentioned her new boss, Daniel Clark, the kind of man who wore confidence like a tailored suit. She'd laugh about how demanding but brilliant he was. And I told myself to be mature, to trust her, until trust stopped feeling mutual. Claire began guarding her phone. Her laughter turned into whispers. The hugs became one-armed and distracted. I'd lie awake listening to her shower at midnight, scrolling through her phone when she thought I was asleep. And through it all, I convinced myself it was just stress. That's the thing about denial. It's the softest kind of self-destruction. That evening, I came home early from work. The house was quiet, too quiet. Her shoes were gone from the hallway. Dinner untouched. I opened the fridge and saw a bottle of white wine she'd promised we'd open together. It was still sealed. I sat on the couch, absently scrolling through my phone when her message came in. "Running late. Big work dinner tonight. Don't wait up." I stared at it. Read it twice. The words looked routine, but they had that distant chill to them, like someone saying goodbye without saying it. Still, I typed back, "All right, don't overwork yourself." And then fate did what I didn't have the courage to do. It stepped in. A message popped up, this time from Samantha Clark, Daniel's wife. She wasn't a close friend, but we'd shared polite conversations at company events. Her text was short, almost casual. "Hey, is Claire home yet?" Daniel just came back. Apparently the dinner was canceled last minute. The world around me went still. The TV, the clock, even my own breathing seemed to pause. I read it again. Canceled last minute. Something inside me snapped into clarity. The kind of clarity you get when your heart stops making excuses for someone who's already left you emotionally. I didn't call. I didn't yell. Instead, I sent Claire a message that would feel like a quiet knife. "That's funny. Your boss's wife just asked if you're home yet." I hit send. And then, silence. Minutes dragged by like hours. My chest tightened, but I didn't move. I just sat there, waiting. 10 minutes later, I heard the familiar hum of her car pulling into the driveway. The sound of her heels clicked across the porch like the rhythm of guilt. When the door opened, Claire looked ghostly. Her lipstick was smudged, hair slightly tousled, eyes wide as if she'd seen something she shouldn't have. "Traffic was insane," she murmured, hanging her coat, voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. I looked up from my phone. "Really?" I said calmly, "because I just talked to Daniel's wife. She said there wasn't any dinner tonight." The color drained from her face. For a split second, she looked like she'd stopped breathing. Then came the smallest, most fragile laugh. "Michael, are you serious?" It must have been rescheduled. Maybe she got it wrong. But I could tell she knew the lie was already dead. Her voice broke. Her eyes flickered, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just stood there, my silence heavier than any insult could have been. Because in that silence, she knew what I knew. Something sacred between us had ended, and neither of us could pretend otherwise anymore. That was the night I decided. If she thought she could play games behind my back, I'd make sure the final move was mine. The next morning, Claire acted like nothing had happened. She moved around the kitchen in her usual rhythm, grinding coffee, scrolling through her phone, humming under her breath. It was almost impressive how easily she pretended. "Morning," she said softly, eyes flicking toward me before darting back to her cup. "Morning," I replied, forcing a calm I didn't feel. If she thought last night was over, she was wrong. I'd seen too much in her eyes, that flicker of panic she couldn't quite hide. But instead of confronting her, I decided to play her game, just better. When you love someone, you don't want to believe they're capable of betrayal. But when they betray you, it changes everything. It teaches you patience. It teaches you how to wait for the perfect moment. So I waited. I watched how she started locking her phone whenever I walked into a room, how her smiles came slower, her laughter shorter. She spent hours on calls with clients, sometimes stepping outside just to talk. That weekend, while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone, only for it to ask for a new passcode. She'd changed it. I smiled bitterly. That told me everything I needed to know. Sunday evening, I drove to her office. The parking lot was empty except for one silver sedan parked near the back, Daniel Clark's car. His license plate was impossible to miss. I didn't want to believe what I was thinking, but the image burned itself into my mind. I sat there in my truck for half an hour, waiting, and then I saw her. Claire walked out of the side door, hair loose, her jacket draped over her arm. She wasn't alone. Daniel was right behind her, laughing about something. His hand brushed her shoulder, and instead of pulling away, she smiled. That small smile was the quietest confession I'd ever seen. I didn't get out of the car, didn't scream or cry. I just watched, memorizing every detail. Because revenge isn't about chaos, it's about control. Over the next few days, I played my part. I made breakfast, kissed her cheek, asked about her day. I even surprised her with flowers once, just to make her think I was still the clueless, trusting husband. Meanwhile, I started collecting pieces, bank statements, phone records, location tags. I even befriended a guy from her office's security team, telling him I was planning a surprise anniversary dinner. That's how I got access to the parking logs. Her car had been parked at the office every night she claimed to have meetings. But the camera footage told a different story. She wasn't working late. She was leaving in Daniel's car. Each new piece of evidence hurt less than the last. Pain has a strange way of turning into focus. And I was focused. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, I glanced at her and realized something. I wasn't looking at the woman I married anymore. She was someone else entirely. The warmth in her had been replaced by calculation, and I could almost see the wall she'd built to justify what she was doing. I decided that night that I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. She'd get her truth the way she gave me mine, unexpectedly. I started my own quiet project. I moved some savings into a separate account, called an old friend who worked in real estate, and began preparing an exit plan. I wasn't going to scream or beg or even accuse her. I'd just make sure that when the truth finally surfaced, she'd have to watch everything she valued crumble, slowly and completely. 2 weeks later, I got what I needed. Confirmation from a mutual acquaintance who had seen Claire and Daniel checking into a resort for a client retreat. The same weekend, she told me she'd be at a leadership seminar. That was the last piece, the final crack in her perfect story. When she came home that night, humming as if nothing was wrong, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. How was your trip? I asked casually, stirring dinner on the stove. She smiled, setting her purse down. Exhausting. You know how work trips are. Yeah, I said quietly. I do. She didn't notice the way I looked at her. Not like a husband, but like someone who'd already said goodbye. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat by the window and stared out at the streetlights. I thought about how easily trust can die, how love can rot beneath the weight of lies. But I also thought about how much strength it takes not to let betrayal turn you into something ugly. I wasn't going to shout or expose her in a fit of rage. I was going to make sure her downfall was poetic, a mirror reflection of every deceit she'd served me. And when that moment came, she wouldn't see it coming. Because just like her, I knew how to smile while planning something far darker beneath the surface. I had always thought revenge was something you read in books. Big gestures, dramatic reveals, lowered velvet curtains. In real life, it's quieter, sterner. It's the work of hours spent arranging the dominoes so they fall exactly where you want them to. I began by sharpening the edges of the life she thought she owned. First, the little things. I changed the passwords on our joint accounts and redirected duplicate statements to an email address only I controlled. Not out of spite at first, but to keep tabs so I knew when things moved and where. I set up a folder on my laptop labeled evidence, filled with screenshots, timestamps, parking logs, and the security footage that showed Claire leaving the office in Daniel's car. Each file was a quiet accusation. Then I called the real estate friend I mentioned earlier, Sarah Monroe, someone I trusted from college who had a talent for playing the long game. I told her, without dramatics, that I was considering renting out the house for a month while I worked on a project overseas. It was partly true. I needed time away, but it also put Sarah on alert. Within a week, she found a suitable tenant, a small, respectable documentary crew looking for a suburban home for a short shoot. They were honest, paid up front, and more importantly, they were the perfect cover for what came next. Because revenge, at its best, is theatrical, and I needed witnesses who couldn't be bribed or begged to look the other way. Next, I started feeding indirect hints into Claire's world. A few carefully timed messages to colleagues that mentioned, offhand, a rumor about leadership accountability sweeping the firm. A casual comment to Samantha, her boss's wife, about how people sometimes overstep professional lines when travel and late nights mix. Samantha, unaware she was walking into a story, passed along her own nervousness to the office grapevine. Gossip does half the job for you if you know how to plan it. During the day, I kept playing the part of the loving, unsuspecting husband. I loaded the dishwasher. I asked about her day in the soft voice of someone who wanted to be reassured. I even booked a weekend getaway, an ostensibly romantic throwback to the woman she once loved to please. She accepted the plans with a small, guarded smile, like a cat deciding whether to take bait. All the while, I waited. Patience was the hardest part. Every time she left for a late meeting, my stomach turned into a knot. But I kept steady. I wanted this to hurt in a way that made sense, an unraveling that matched the careful way she dressed up betrayal. Then the wheels I'd oiled started to move. An email from HR arrived one morning, addressed to every staff member at Daniel's firm, regarding a routine audit and a reminder of the company's conflict of interest policy. Nobody knew I had nudged a contact inside accounting. Just a small, professional note requesting documentation for travel expenses. The timing was perfect. Within a week, murmurs reached me through different channels. A friend from Claire's book club mentioned she'd seen her name in a thread about manager indiscretions. Samantha's text grew shorter, more nervous. Daniel, oddly, began appearing in public less often. The dominoes were tilting. The real strike came the evening of our anniversary, an irony I appreciated in a cold, sharp way. I'd planned the night carefully, a candlelit dinner at home, soft music she once loved. Midway through our second course, a knock came at the front door. I opened it to find two men in plain suits. No badges, no theatrics, just polite firmness. They introduced themselves as auditors from a consulting firm working under contract for Daniel's company. Their timing could not have been more deliberate. Claire's fork clattered on the plate. Her face drained to a shade I only ever saw in bad dreams. "What? Who are they?" she managed, voice small, betraying the panic behind her practiced composure. "Good evening," one of them said, stepping inside with a business card. "We're following up on a few expense reports submitted last quarter. Do you mind if we ask a few questions?" For a split second, my living room felt like a stage lit for a play I'd already scripted. Claire's mouth opened and closed. She reached for 100 explanations. Work deadlines, clerical errors, mixed up calendars. But they fell like wet paper. The auditors were professional and unsentimental. They asked for receipts, travel logs, and details of any accommodations provided on behalf of the company. I watched as the facade she'd built with whispered lies began to break under clinical interrogation. She stammered, then searched for the answers on her phone, which she now kept in her coat pocket like a talisman. But the auditors had documents, dates, and photos, tiny, factual things that don't care about desperation. When they asked her about a particular weekend at a riverside resort, she hesitated, and then tried to produce an expense report that matched her version. It didn't. Her story cracked. I felt no joy when she faltered, only a hard, steady satisfaction, like a carpenter finally seeing a joint align after hours of precise work. She stared at me then, eyes wide, the old vulnerability bleeding through the armor. "Michael," she whispered, as if placing my name in that fragile space might summon mercy. I said nothing. Words would have cheapened the moment. Instead, I let the silence do the work I'd been preparing for. Outside, in the quiet street, the documentary crew's van idled with lights off. Witnesses who would later corroborate comings and goings, who would verify details she couldn't undo. Inside, the auditors continued, methodically unspooling evidence. Claire's breath hitched. Daniel's name came up, and with it, the inevitable question of impropriety. That night, her carefully curated life began to unravel like a sweater pulled at the wrong loop. The betrayal she'd buried under late-night excuses and secret smiles had nowhere left to hide. As the auditors packed their folders and left, Claire sank into a chair and looked at me with a mixture of fear and pleading. "Please," she said, not to me but to the empty room, "please don't." I stepped forward, not with vindictiveness, but with a cold resolve born of every small betrayal I'd witnessed. "I won't humiliate you," I told her, voice steady. "I will, however, make sure the truth is seen." She understood then, not how far I'd planned, but that I had planned. And in her eyes, the last of that indifferent mask fell away, leaving only the wobbling, terrified shape of the woman who'd made a choice she now regretted. Revenge, I realized as I stood there in the aftermath, is not a scream. It's a mirror. And that night, Claire finally had a look at her reflection. Morning sunlight bled through the curtains, soft but cruel. The house felt hollow, as if all the laughter and love that once filled it had slipped through the cracks overnight. Claire sat at the kitchen table in her robe, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. She looked smaller somehow, like guilt had taken inches off her. I poured myself coffee without speaking. The sound of liquid hitting the cup filled the silence between us. She finally looked up, her voice raw. "Michael, please. I never meant for it to get this far." I leaned on the counter, arms crossed. "You didn't mean to get caught, Claire. There's a difference." Her eyes shimmered with tears that, once upon a time, would have broken me. Not anymore. I'd already done my crying. In the quiet hours when I pieced together her lies and realized how easily love can become blindness. "I was lonely," she said weakly. "You were always working. You barely looked at me." I let out a low laugh. Humorless, sharp. "You don't get to rewrite the story now. I was working for us, Claire. For the house you wanted, the vacations you planned, but never had time for. And while I was doing that, you were building something with another man behind my back." She dropped her gaze. "I made a mistake." "No," I said quietly. "You made a choice." The truth lingered like smoke. She tried again, reaching across the table, fingers trembling. "Can we fix this? Please. I'll quit my job. I'll do anything." I stepped back, shaking my head. "You don't get to decide that anymore." Then I slid a manila folder across the counter toward her. Inside were printed screenshots, the security footage stills, and a letter from the firm's HR department. Formal notification of an internal investigation involving her and Daniel. She looked at me, confusion giving way to realization. You sent this." "I didn't have to," I said. "All I did was shine a light where you tried to hide. The rest took care of itself." Her breath caught. "They'll fire me. They'll do what's right," I said softly. "You built your career on honesty, remember? Maybe it's time you live by it." Tears streamed down her face, but they didn't stir pity in me anymore. There's a strange peace that comes when you finally stop trying to understand someone's betrayal. It stops being about anger. It becomes clarity. I took one last look around the kitchen, the same room where we used to plan our future, where she used to laugh over spilled coffee. It felt like a museum now. "I signed the papers," I said, sliding a second envelope across the counter. "You'll find everything's fair. You keep the house. I'll take what I brought in." She stared at the envelope like it was a weapon. "You're leaving?" "I already left," I said, turning toward the door. "Last night was just the paperwork." She stood, shaking. "Michael, please don't do this. We can start over." I paused by the doorway, my hand resting on the frame. "You started over the moment you lied to me. I'm just finishing what you began." The door clicked shut behind me with a quiet finality that echoed louder than any argument we'd ever had. Outside, the air was cool and clean. For the first time in months, I could breathe. The weight that had been sitting on my chest lifted, replaced by something simpler, freedom. As I walked down the driveway, I looked back once and saw her through the kitchen window, shoulders hunched, face buried in her hands. It wasn't triumph I felt, just a deep, quiet understanding that some endings aren't meant to be loud. Sometimes, justice doesn't need an audience. It just needs closure. And that morning, I finally had mine.